Hi, I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that X-Men Apocalypse is no perfect movie. So in X-Men Apocalypse, the world's very first mutant called Apocalypse, played by Oscar Isaac, wakes up from hibernation and he is disgusted by the fact that humans survive mostly by technology rather than their physical strength. So he decides to cleanse the human race with the help of his 4 horsemen, them including Storm, Angel, Psylocke, and Magneto. And it is up to the X-Men, which now features Jean Grey, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, and among a few others, to stop them. Now, as I'm currently making this video, X-Men Apocalypse now has a rating of 48%, I think, on Rotten Tomatoes, and there are so many critics and fans who are describing this movie as being generic, that it relies on action over characters, and that they think the villain is cliched and stuff like that. And in all honesty, I do not understand any of the hate for this movie, because, in all honesty, this may be, like, among my 2 favorite X-Men movies. And here's why. Because it takes the time with its characters, and it shows us their backstories, their powers, and it doesn't rely on exposition to tell us. You may have noticed in my older reviews of the X-Men movies that while a lot of stuff still holds up, there are so many scenes that are just 2 characters talking about their past, as opposed to us actually seeing the past for ourselves. And for reasons like that, I personally enjoyed Sophie Turner's portrayal of Jean Grey and Ty Sheridan as Cyclops a lot more than Famke Janssen or James Marsden in the original trilogy. And that's because instead of them just sitting down talking about their past and their powers, the director Bryan Singer, who I am so glad has returned to the franchise, shows us how they try to control their powers. When Cyclops first shows up at the X-Mansion, we see what happened when he lost his normal eyesight. We see through his perspective what the world looks like with his visor on, and we can empathize with him when he acts so cynical about it. And with this version of Jean Grey, not only does she use her powers in a very cool and clever way, like using a mind trick to make herself look invisible to everyone else, or her using her telekinesis in a cool way, but through her perspective, we can see what she sees in other people's heads, and when Professor X, who once again is played very well by James McAvoy, notices that she's struggling with how to control it, he doesn't reflect on the past like Patrick Stewart did in the originals. Instead, he sits her down like a normal parent would, and he talks to her in a mature way. And when he does encourage her to use her powers to the fullest near the very end of the movie, she really trusts him, and you can see that she has faith in his wisdom, and she really shines as a result. So I felt the student-teacher relationship in this one much more than in the other ones, which is a shame, because this is in 1 movie, and the previous one was in 3, which is really saying something. Now, say what you will about Apocalypse's look and design and voice and all that, but I still think they make him look very cool and creepy, and Oscar Isaac, in my opinion, gives a fantastic performance. And what I loved most about him in this movie is that when he assembles his horsemen, he manipulates them both physically and mentally, because when he does amplify their powers, they each feel more powerful than ever before, they have this huge adrenaline rush, and they begin to think and feel the same way that Apocalypse does, that they're the strongest and that only the weak should die, particularly when Apocalypse shows Magneto his past and really exploits that, and it was completely shocking and horrible to watch as Magneto, the guy who was the king of manipulating others to his cause, was outdone, which was so shocking and such a very tragic scene to watch. And the action scenes in this movie? Wow. The action scenes in this movie, in my opinion, are the spectacular, the best in the franchise. The scope in which we see the whole world collapsing looks gigantic. The fight choreography is very fast and creative, like for example when Psylocke is fighting off Beast. That was a very cool scene in my opinion. And the fact that the Horsemen's powers are amplified really raises the stakes, especially when Magneto is able to lift so much more metal than before, even like underground. It's just crazy to watch. And in my opinion, there's never a pointless fight scene. I feel like each action set piece really propelled the story in some way. And I feel like I gotta mention this, but the Quicksilver scene in this movie actually outdoes the last one, which I didn't even think was possible. The new song was very catchy, the location was bigger, and without giving anything away, Quicksilver actually has to save more people in even less time than he did in the Pentagon, which is really cool. And I also want to mention that Quicksilver in this one is actually surprisingly given a more emotional reason to be in this movie, and he actually has a couple of dramatic moments that I thought were very heartfelt and enjoyable to watch. Now, during the second act, there is something that happens that, if you're a big X-Men fan, you're going to notice that this is very reminiscent of X2. And I'll admit, at first I just looked and went, really? We're doing this again? But then I started to think about it, and I realized that because of Days of Future Past, everyone loves to point out that Last Stand and X-Men Origins were wiped out of existence, but people really forget, so were the original movies in the process. So the timeline is changed, but certain things play out the same, just with minor differences. And the one that they do in this movie, after some hard thinking, I actually thought it was pretty clever. And this change actually makes Colonel Stryker, who in this one is played by a different actor, I forget his name, I apologize, is more easier to understand than he was in X2. Because without giving anything away, he genuinely cares for humanity's survival in this one, and he isn't just some genocidal jerk who wants to kill other people like he was in X2. As for problems, the biggest one for me centered around Rose Byrne's character, Maura McTaggart, who returns in this one. And in my first class review, I said that I didn't think she looked all that invested. And that's not the problem in this one. I think her performance got a little bit better, and in the first half, she searches and finds some pretty valuable information about Apocalypse. But during the second half, there are scenes in which I don't think she actually needed to be there. I didn't think she served any real purpose in propelling the story in any way. And the other minor problem is that there are a few scenes in the second half that I think went on a little bit too long. Aside from that, I had a pretty good time. X-Men Apocalypse, in my opinion, is the most visually told out of the X-Men movies. The acting is great as usual. The character arcs are very well thought out, in my opinion. And this is either, in my opinion, the second favorite or favorite X-Men movie of all time. I'm not sure if it's that much better than Days of Future Past, but in my opinion, it's pretty close. And for that reason, I'm going to give X-Men Apocalypse a 4.5 out of 5. Guys, thanks as always for watching, and if you haven't seen any of my previous X-Men reviews, be sure to check them out on my channel or at NoPerfectMovie.com. Be sure to check out any of my other reviews at NoPerfectMovie.com. Be sure to like, subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care.